says there are only two things in life that you worry about, whether you're healthy or whether you're sick. If you're healthy, you ain't got nothing to worry about. But if you're sick, you got two things to worry about. Whether you're going to get better, whether you're going to get worse. You get better, you ain't got nothing to worry about. But if you get worse, you got two things to worry about. Whether you're going to live, whether you're going to die. If you live, you ain't got nothing to worry about. But if you die, you got two things. Whether you're going to heaven, whether you're going to hell. If you go to heaven, you ain't got nothing to worry about. But if you go to hell, you got two things to worry about. Original or extra crispy? That's
I guess ultimately life is that simple, that there's two things to think about. But for me, I don't make it that simple. I've got a lot of questions, a lot of decisions, concerns that you have. So questions are part of life. They're a good thing. They're a thing. I read this way. I got to thinking about it, and I read that the average person asks 30 questions a day. Now, for your household, is that high or low? That's low for my house. I'm married to the queen of questions. And I also read for children, the average for children, they ask 100 questions a day. And some of you probably believe that. And different age groups along that way, they even ask more than that. Regardless of that, of whatever, questions are an important part of life. We're in our third week of our series that we're calling Messy, and that's where we're looking through at the church in Corinth and the letter that Paul wrote there that we call 1 Corinthians, the letter he wrote there. Paul founded this church, he visited this church, he wrote letters to this church, and the church was truly a mess. It was a lot of things going on there that were a mess. In the first 2 weeks of our study, we looked at the things that we looked at, the messes. They were messes that they created, the things that they had really messed up in the church. Today's a little different. I say with this, and they're seeking guidance. And so they asked Paul for help in some areas here. And they reach out to him in some form, and he writes them back about this. So we're going to spend our time in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, and verse 1 says this: "Now for the matters you wrote about, it is good for a man not to marry." Now, guys, I'm going to do you a favor right here, and I'm going to stop you. I don't want you to even say anything like, "Now you tell me." I don't care if it is Father's Day. You can't say something like that and get away with it. Another thing is, there's probably some women, some wives sitting here thinking the same thing. Now you tell me that it was a good thing. But continuing on what it says in 1 Corinthians 7, continuing with verse 2. It says, "But since there is so much immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. The husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife's body does not belong to her alone, but also to her husband. In the same way, the husband's body does not belong to him alone, but also to his wife. Do not deprive each other except for mutual consent and for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. Then come together again so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. I say this as a concession, not as a command. I wish that all men were as I am, but each man has his own gift from God. One has this gift, another has that." And it becomes very obvious as the questions that they are posing to Paul surrounded the subject of singleness, marriage, and the role of sexual intimacy, the role of sex in all of our lives. Why do you think this was a big deal to the church at Corinth? Well, consider this. Picture the Corinthian church, a church smack dab in the middle of one of the most immoral cities in the world. It was a port city. There was a constant travel of men coming in and out because of the trade routes, and the sex industry was rampant there. They even had a temple where they worshipped sex idols. There were temple prostitutes. I mean, it would be hard to imagine it being a more promiscuous place than the city of Corinth. And then picture this. These people who had grown up, had lived there, they're all of a sudden, they're Christians. They're young Christians, and they're coming out of that kind of history, some of their past history. They may be second, third generations that this is the way my parents acted, this is the way my grandparents acted. And all of a sudden, they're Christians, and they have legitimate questions. And scholars have even thought that maybe within the church itself, some people were coming in with some extreme lifestyles. Some were promoting, saying total abstinence is the way to go. And others were saying, oh no, it's just open free reign sex inside marriage, outside marriage. And so if you think about those things, you could see why they would ask these kind of questions. Paul is not just going to answer questions. He's giving principles for which to live by. And because they are principles to live by, we can benefit from those as well. And I just want to point out a couple of things, just glean some things from these verses. And one of them is just the power of marriage, the power of intimacy, the power of sex in the right way. Remember, he says, because there's so much sexual immorality, it is good for a man to have his wife, a wife to have her husband. Something so powerful as that, you can make a statement like that, has boundaries though. It has boundaries in which to operate. And Paul says, and it's taught throughout the Bible, that the boundaries are within marriage. That's where it is to take place. If it was just a physical act, if it was just sex, Paul wouldn't have written so much about it. He wouldn't have taken the time to do this. There wouldn't be the problems. Consider this point. Marriage protects and empowers. Marriage protects and empowers. I want to go to an Old Testament scripture here you're probably very familiar with. Ecclesiastes 4, starting with verse 9, it says this. 2 are better than 1, because they have a good return for their work. If one falls down, his friend can help him up. But pity the man who falls and has no one to help him up. Also, if 2 lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, 2 can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. Now, to be honest, that passage in Ecclesiastes is not a marriage passage. It's not. I'm not drawing it out of an instruction where he's talking to married couples. It's actually a section where he's talking about the journey of life, how important it is to have friends, how important it is to have relationships and people you rely on, people you go through life with. But don't you think that if he's talking about the power of relationships to life, that it would apply to marriage as well? That the strongest union is that it applies to that people make life full. That's what makes life full. And all of this can apply to the journey that we have as married people. I was reminded of a story I read about a husband and wife. They'd been married like 50 years, and they'd gone to bed at night. And like so many households, the man lays there, and he's about ready. As soon as he goes to bed, he's about ready to fall asleep. And the woman's laying there thinking of everything in the world. And she says, you know, when we were young, when we first got married, when we went to bed, you would hold my hand. So he a little bit exasperated, goes, so he reaches over and takes hold of her hand. And they lay there a while like that. And she says, you know, when we were young, we were first married, we'd go to bed, you would just snuggle up to me. And he kind of goes, So He kind of gets the covers on, and he snuggles up to her, and they lay there that way for a while. And she says, when we were first married, you would just take, and we were snuggling like this, you would nibble on my ear. He throws the covers back and swings his legs over the bed. She says, where are you going? He says, I'm going to get my teeth. Now, I realize life changes. We get older, we go through and we become familiar and all those things, and life changes. But it's a journey. And we should realize the power of the intimacy we have with the person that we're married to. We don't need to ever take that for granted. Recognize its power. But also, it protects us, but we also got to recognize that we need to protect it. We need to protect that relationship. I read this years ago, and it's always stuck with me, that somebody said that if you do not care for your mate, if you not care for your spouse and take care of their needs, it's like sending them out into the world hungry in a fast food society. There's always somebody they're willing to serve. Our lives are not our own. That's true as single or married, but in the married, our bodies are not our own. And when we hear people chant and make it their life thing, they'll chant things like, my body, my life, or my body, my choice. My body, my choice. That's the most ridiculous thing that's ever been said. Now, you can live as a single person with that motto. You can live as a married person with that motto, but that doesn't mean you're in the will of God. There's never a place where it's just me. You can live that way, but there's people around you that you're going to hurt. There's a relationship with God you're going to hurt. It's not going to be in the will of God. That's just a definition of selfishness. And Paul said, we read it just a minute ago, he says, the wife's body does not belong to her, the husband's body does not belong solely to him, but they do to each other. And we must be willing to look after the other person. I mean, that's Christianity 101. That we look after the other person. That the other person is more important than me as an individual. And so it carries right into marriage. Over in Ephesians, probably my favorite book, there's a section in Ephesians 5 where he deals with marriage. And I love what Ephesians 5:21, it says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. One another. And then he goes into this wonderful direction and advice for how husbands and wives are to handle those daily situations, that journey through life, how they handle things. But starting with submitting to one another, putting the other person first. And then he gets down to verse 31 in Ephesians 5 that says this, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. That's important. That's how important that Paul points out that the relationship between a husband and wife is. And if he points it out and calls it one flesh, then it's worth protecting. It's worth taking care of. It's worth elevating. That we make the time for each other. We care for each other. That nothing, absolutely nothing takes its place or gets in the way. The job, the career, money, nothing. Your kids even do not replace or take priority over the relationship between husband and wife. This was some years back. Stephen, I asked her permission to tell this story. Stephen and Jenny Lilly, after they had their girls, and it was the first weekend since they had children that they were going to go away on their own. And they broke the news to Kate and Sadie, and Kate just melted down. She just did not like the idea at all that they were going away without taking them with her. And it just, after the tears, Kate just finally said, let's just get this weekend over with. It was almost like, you're going to leave me here in the house with a box of Cheerios. We'll see you in a couple of days. She had made that they were well cared for. But even though she didn't see the value of it, let me tell you, as they grow, they'll see the value that Mommy and Daddy have a special love for each other. That they love us, but they love each other, and that they go out to dinner together. They go to places without us. And they recognize that, trust me, they grow up knowing and seeing that importance. I believe so strongly in that, and we do here, that if you need to get away, to get off with your husband or wife, call the church, and one of our other staff members will volunteer to babysit your kids. So. Another thing I want to point out here is this. Glorify God wherever you are. Whatever your station in life is, glorify God with your life. Why would Paul emphasize so much that single is preferred? Look at what he says in 1 Corinthians 7, 32 and 33. I would like you to be free from concern. An unmarried man is concerned about the Lord's affairs, how he can please the Lord. But a married man is concerned about the affairs of this world, how he can please his wife. And this is not a cut down to this. This is not a looking down, because so many other places in the Bible it talks about the responsibility and how important it is for a husband to look after his wife, how a father to look after the family. So this isn't a cut. It's just he said, this is something to be celebrated. It's of highest importance. By my count, just a rough way to however you want to read it, in chapter 7, Paul champions being single as preferred at least 6 times, he says it. But also 5 times that I can see, he talks about how he champions marriage and how important and how that is the best thing to do. And you go, well, Paul, which is it? Are you bipolar? Are you talking out of both sides of your mouth? Are you trying to be a politician? The answer is no. He's just pointing out the pros and cons of what we have in life. If we choose to be single, or we choose to be married. He says to be single in serving the Lord is preferred, but it is not commanded. He uses a very important word. He says it is your gift. Some have it, some don't. And if it is forced, it always leads to trouble. If one of those is forced upon, it usually leads to trouble. I believe unintentionally, we may sometimes emphasize one over the other. And you can look through society, you can see sometimes singleness is championed as the best, and sometimes marriage is the best. And I made that mistake the other night. Janice and I were at a function, and it was a young college-age girl there that was in the function, and we got to talking to her and observing her. She's a beautiful young woman, and she had her grandmother with her, so she was taking care of her grandmother and taking care of her needs. Her personality was she was just a sharp young woman. And what I thought, this is what came to mind, I went, how in the world has some guy not snatched her up? And then I said, Greg, that's not right. You don't know. She may be at that age and stage in life where she says, I'm not going to get into a serious relationship right now. I want to finish my college. I've got other things that I need to take care of first. Or she may have been saying, I have standards and I'm not going to lower them to marry. She may have just she may be in a relationship that I know nothing about, and that's none of my business. Or maybe she's coming out of a broken relationship and she's needing time to heal. The point I'm trying to make is we don't need to make the mistake that assuming that everything needs to be the way that we see it is to be normal. In my mind, I was thinking it's normal that she's dating some guy because she's a wonderful young woman. Doesn't mean to be that way. Doesn't need to be that way. And sometimes I think we look at the will of God like the aisle of this church. It's straight and just leads from door to door. But there's room within the will of God for different directions. I've used this illustration a couple of times, but an umbrella. If you're standing under an umbrella out of the rain, it really doesn't matter if you're on this side of the umbrella or this side of the umbrella. You're still under the umbrella. And there are many things in life where as long as you're under the will of God, there's room for variation. And we need to celebrate those things. Paul says single is preferred because of serving God, but he says not preferred to the extent of causing sin and frustration. Look what he says in verse 17. Nevertheless, each one should retain the place in life that the Lord assigned to him and to which God has called him. This is the rule I'd lay down in all the churches. And if you read through this, just this one chapter and read through, you're going to be blessed of all the things you see, because Paul talks about the station in life where you are right now. And he goes through and he gives, it's all surrounding about this thing of singleness or marriage and the role of sex. He gives advice to widows, what he thinks is best for a widow. He talks about being remarried, best advice. He says he talks to the divorced or people who are considering divorce. He gives some advice about what's the best way. He even speaks to slaves in a section about what is the best way to serve God. He gives advice to the married that we've been talking about here. He gives advice to the unequally yoked. In other words, a Christian who turns out is married to someone who is not a Christian. And they had questions about, what do I do? And he comes back on all these things and gives advice and then says, serve God wherever you are. Serve God in whatever station in life you are. This should be extremely exciting to us, that God is willing to use us, that he has a plan, he has a purpose. It doesn't matter what's happened or what situation or place you are in life, he has a plan to use you. Jesus said he came to seek and to save the lost. That's everybody. No one is disqualified, not willing, that he does not willing to seek. And you can find him. Well, how do I wrap things up today? We never wrap up what God has to say about something because so we can't handle that in 25 minutes. But we can wrap up what we're going to talk about today. You've probably heard of the Chinese wise man that lived, Confucius. I ran across one of his quips of wisdom this week. It says, "The man who asks a question is a fool for a minute. The man who does not ask a question is a fool for life." Now you think about that. You know, we may have read some of these questions that the Corinthians had, and we go, well, that's odd. And if we think about it, no, it isn't. They were seeking the answers to things. They asked some very good questions. And the important thing now is, did they listen? Do they listen? So that's kind of where we want to wrap things up and leave today. It's just to think about those things. The power of marriage, the power of intimacy, the power of sex in the right way. Are we dealing with that? Are we taking care of our marriage? Are we growing in our singleness, that may be where I am my whole life, or it may be that somewhere down the road I will be a spouse of someone. But are you dealing with those questions? Are you listening to the answers that God gives? Are you protecting that? Are you treasuring it and protecting it in how you live? And finally, the final question is wherever you are now in life, are you glorifying God? Are you using your station in life? And that's health, wealth, age, whatever it is, are you using it as a way to glorify God? Because God has a plan and a purpose for you, no matter where it is.